Earlier this year, an agonized Gold Star father spoke to NBC News in an attempt to find out more about a high-profile January raid in Yemen that took the life of his son, a member of the famed Navy SEAL Team 6. Now, after an 8-month investigation involving 24 officials and special operations insiders, NBC News chief legal and investigative correspondent Cynthia McFadden has this exclusive report on the secret military action that claimed the life of Ryan Owens.
Ryan died as he lived, a warrior and a hero.
You might remember this emotional moment from President Trump's first address to Congress. The president's tribute to Ryan Owens, a Navy SEAL killed in Yemen, as his grieving widow Corinne captured America's heart. Ryan, a 36-year-old father of 3, died in the first military operation the president approved within a week of taking office. Ryan was part of a team of Navy SEALs sent to go after al-Qaeda terrorists.
Ryan's legacy is etched into eternity. Thank you.
What were you thinking? What were you feeling when you saw it?
I don't want to discuss it, his speech at all.
Bill Owens is Ryan Owens' father.
I know how wonderful he is, so I don't need that reaffirmation from the president.
Bill Owens spent nearly his entire life serving others, in the Army as a Green Beret, in the Navy, and as a policeman. And he understood Ryan couldn't even tell him about his secret missions. But now he wants to know all about his last one. He's worried it was rushed and ill-conceived from the start.
I feel that somebody has to stick up for Ryan and find out why this happened. I'm his father, and I'll do it.
It all began during the Obama administration. A proposal for an on-the-ground raid in Yemen.
Hello, everybody.
By January, with the inauguration looming, Yemen decisions were deferred to President Trump. 5 days into the Trump presidency, his new Secretary of Defense, James Mattis, recommended the mission to the president at a White House dinner. NBC News consultant Sean Naylor is an expert on America's special operations. It was the first time his national security team had gotten together. Put this into context for me.
Well, it's certainly unusual. You don't often hear about major combat actions being approved over a meal, in a dining room as opposed to in the Situation Room or somewhere in the Pentagon.
During our investigation, we've been told some of what was said at that dinner. 2 White House sources tell us that though Secretary Mattis said the raid could be a game changer, both Steve Bannon and Jared Kushner questioned acting on what they saw as an Obama plan. The next morning, President Trump asked his national security advisor, General Michael Flynn, what he thought. Our White House sources said Flynn told the president a tip from an ally indicated that one of the most wanted terrorists in the world, Qasem al-Rimi, might be at the Yemen target. Flynn said capturing or killing al-Rimi would distinguish Trump from Obama right out of the box.
Flynn said that executing this particular mission would be a good way to do that.
Could that have been the reason for the raid's timing? We might never know. The Pentagon said the January 29th date was picked because of intelligence reports and because it was a moonless night. Our investigation brought us to the Horn of Africa and a nation surrounded by some of the most dangerous real estate in the world, Djibouti. It's a country most Americans have never heard of, and yet the U.S. has a major military presence here. And it's from here in Djibouti that the Navy SEALs launched that raid into Yemen, which went terribly wrong. From the American base here, Yemen is less than 100 miles away. The Pentagon said the purpose of the secret mission was to gather valuable intelligence about al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, known as AQAP, the terrorist group headed by al-Rimi, infamous for trying to put bombs on airliners. So, just after midnight on January 29th, U.S. forces swooped in to the anarchy of Yemen. SEAL Team 6 hit the ground 5 miles downhill from its objective, a compound in a tiny village. But right from the start, trouble. AQAP was onto them.
Overhead surveillance of the target revealed individuals moving to fighting positions, essentially getting ready for the assault force.
They were depending upon the element of surprise, and at this point, they're compromised.
A decision was made to proceed with the assault anyway.
We do not know at what level that decision was made.
No, we don't know who made that decision.
As they got close, according to the Pentagon, the SEALs met unexpected and fierce resistance, including women who took up arms. What some sources see as a stunning admission that U.S. intelligence had failed to detect the size and capability of the terrorist force. At the U.S. military camp in Djibouti, we asked the U.S. commander for the Horn of Africa, General David Furness, about what went wrong. He closely followed the mission that night, but it was controlled by a separate Special Operations Task Force, also in Djibouti. Were you monitoring it here, however?
Yes.
So you knew things were going
Yes.
badly?
Complicated. Yeah, there was a casualty.
The casualty was Ryan Owens. He was mortally wounded just as the raid began. Ryan Owens went down within the first 5 minutes, we're told. Medevac aircraft were dispatched. Then, more trouble. A Marine Corps Osprey went down and injured the 3 crew members aboard. It was later destroyed. So the Pentagon said it had a hard landing.
Hard landing is the phrase that the Pentagon likes to use when it doesn't want to say crash.
The SEALs called in fighter jets and attack helicopters, which let loose on the target village. The destruction was massive and diminished the chance of retrieving any valuable intelligence items like laptops or cell phones. After 50 minutes of chaos, the mission was over.
After the mission in Yemen that took his life, Navy SEAL Ryan Owens was returned to his family in a flag-draped casket on the tarmac at Dover Air Force Base. President Trump was there to pay his respects, but Owens' father, Bill, declined to meet the president. He was stricken with grief and angry about his son's mission. Here again is NBC News Chief Legal and Investigative Correspondent Cynthia McFadden.
This never-before-broadcast secret drone video shows the terrorist compound still smoldering the next day. 14 al-Qaeda fighters were killed, but even more civilians died, 16, including children. 10 children under the age of 13 died.
Combat, especially close combat, is a messy business. I can tell you, though, that they did everything in their power to prevent loss of life for innocent civilians. It's a dirty business, especially up close and personal on missions like were performed that night in Yemen.
Indeed, everything that happened that night might well have been chalked up to the fog and tragedy of war had it not been for what happened in Washington just hours later. The word from the White House: the raid was a success.
This weekend, we carried out a very successful raid against al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula.
But criticism mounted. Senator John McCain, who was briefed on the mission, challenged the administration.
When you lose a $75 million airplane, and more importantly, American lives are life is lost and wounded, I don't believe that you can call it a success.
The White House struck back.
I think anybody who undermines the success of that raid owes an apology and a disservice to the life of Chief Owens.
Don't hide behind the death of my son to try and justify that this raid was a success, because it wasn't.
A month after Ryan was killed, the president said he understood Bill Owens' pain and then addressed the Yemen raid himself.
Well, this was a mission that was started before I got here. This was something that was, just they wanted to do.
The president appeared on Fox and Friends.
They explained what they wanted to do, the generals, who are very respected. My generals are the most respected that we've had in many decades, I believe. And they lost Ryan.
When he says they, referring to the generals, they lost Ryan.
That's it in a nutshell. He evidently doesn't feel responsibility, even though he's the one that signed off on it and initiated the action. So it kind of speaks for itself.
On Capitol Hill, General Joseph Votel did what the president did not do.
I accept the responsibility for this. We lost a lot on this operation. We lost a valued operator. We had people wounded. We caused civilian casualties, lost an expensive aircraft.
But he also testified some valuable intelligence was gathered, though sources we talked to disagreed and said no significant intelligence was in fact collected.
It was a screw up from the start that ended badly. No matter what I do, it's still there.
This spring at Arlington National Cemetery, Bill Owens saw his son's headstone for the first time. His grief still laced with doubts.
Cynthia and her team report there is widespread concern about the overuse of special forces, not just by this administration, but over the past decade. As for lessons learned, according to experts in the special operations field and on Capitol Hill, the Yemen raid demonstrates that truncated decision-making can lead to disastrous results, like the death of a Navy SEAL and civilians on the ground.
Hello, Today fans. Thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking that button down there and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives.